Thank you for joining us on About Fundraising, the podcast. Today, my guest is my friend, my mentor, and my patron, Dr. Harriet Boorhem. Harriet has been an executive director of a nonprofit organization. Her academic training is in counseling and guidance. She's a business owner. It's Lonely at the Top offers coaching and training for nonprofit leaders. And most recently, she's published her first book. Harriet, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, Diana. It's always a pleasure.
So today I want to talk about leadership. I mean, that's what you do. That's who you are. That's what you help others do. The first question that comes to mind is, what makes a nonprofit leader, an executive director, good at their job?
The key to being a great leader is to be authentic. You have to be you. You can't go in and try to fool people because they will know immediately and they won't trust you. And the second thing is that you've got to have empathy, which is really kind of hilarious that is now in the top 5 characteristics needed to be a great leader, because 15, 20 years ago, you never heard that. Never heard it at all. It had to do with charisma and being able to take charge and making decisions quickly. And in study after study now, empathy comes out as one of the top 5 characteristics that you have to have in order to be a good leader, great leader.
So what does that mean? I mean,
here's what it means. It means that you're able to be in someone else's shoes. It's like in family therapy, we call it joining with the family. When you are leading an organization and you have a diverse employee population, you have to be able to get to know them on their terms and understand their experiences, or want to understand. That's what's key. You have to want to understand their experiences. Because if you don't want to, then you're not going to have empathy. If you have an employee, say, who's struggling at home, maybe they're a single parent, they've been late a couple of times, you're not sure why, and you're not willing to sit down and ask them, hey, what's going on in your life? I'm really interested in knowing. And you hear, well, I've got to take 2 buses to get my kid to daycare, and then sometimes they're late and blah, blah, blah. You're not going to have empathy for that employee. And you're just going to say, well, you have to be here on time no matter what. And so times have really changed in terms of what is expected of a leader in relationship with their employees. It didn't used to be that way.
Do you think that because there are more women in these roles that has brought about this shift in focus?
Well, sadly, no. I would love to say yes. Women naturally have more empathy than men because of how we are conditioned. That's conditioned out of men very early still, unfortunately. But what's interesting is the relational piece and the empathy piece actually came out of feminist family therapy and relational therapy, where they began talking about the equality of value for women and other populations that are not the majority population. And as happens many times, that concept was, I don't know if hijacked is too strong a word or whatever, by the guy who wrote the book on emotional intelligence. Mm. And so that concept became written by a man called emotional intelligence, and so therefore it was credible. And it became more and more important as a characteristic in leaders.
Okay, we're getting really deep here.
I know, I can't help it.
I know. That's why I have to be careful with you. So a couple of things come to mind, and I want to ask my next question. And the next question is, so what makes a good ED, and we're just focusing on EDs and leaders of nonprofits for the focus of this conversation. But what makes these executive directors who are good, they're empathetic, they pay attention to their people, and they still get the budget done. Mm-hmm. What makes a good ED a better or even exceptional executive director or leader?
Well, certainly experience. I mean, nothing substitutes for experience. The other crucial characteristic of being a great leader and a great ED is that you have to be able to think both on the macro and the micro level. So what do I mean by that? So micro is tiny, macro is big picture. So if I'm an ED of a small nonprofit and the toilet is stopped up and I have to go plunge the toilet, which I did many times, trust me. If I just go plunge the toilet and then go back to what I'm doing, that's not being a leader. If I go plunge the toilet and while I'm plunging the toilet, I'm thinking, now why did this happen? What are the systems that we've got that broke down so that this happened? And how do I make sure this doesn't happen again? And who can I talk to who can come out if this happens again and do some pro bono work for us? So I'm always thinking at a meta level about what the organization needs, how to get that, who to talk to, who my contacts are, who my network is. I don't stay in the weeds. Even when I'm in the weeds, I'm thinking up. I'm thinking macro. What can I do with this? How can I use it? How can I parlay it into something for the organization? That's the difference. And that is the hardest thing for our women to learn. Because when you're in the fire, it's really hard to think about, well, wonder why this started in the first place. And how can we keep this from happening again? You know, it's hard to do that when you're in the middle of it. But you have to learn to do it.
One of the things that I hear, people talk about at times, and actually that I've experienced myself in a leadership role. I was an executive director for a while. Mm-hmm. It was very difficult.
Right.
Very difficult.
It's not easy.
And as I was in that role and other leadership roles, the idea of imposter syndrome, mm-hmm. It's like, why am
Diana,
I here?
You're not going to like this answer either.
Okay,
but go ahead.
but what right do I have to be here?
Right.
Why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
Why, whatever all is going through my head.
Right.
So I want you to talk about that some, because I think many women, of course, I'm guessing men as well, but people feel that way. I mean, and if they don't, are they narcissistic enough to think that they're not imposters?
No, I think they're lucky. So, yes, men encounter imposter syndrome. The difference between men and women and imposter syndrome is the consequences for men are generally not as dire as they are for women. When a man has imposter syndrome, he has a mentor system quickly made that can say, oh, no, you can do it. Come on, you've got it. Women don't have those ready-made. Still, networks. You have to make those networks. The other thing is that imposter syndrome has been studied as an intra-psychic issue, meaning it's something in us that makes us feel that way. When the truth is, it's the systems in which we work that make us feel less than. So I saw something on Facebook the other day that says, being black is not a barrier for me. Racism is the barrier. Being a woman is not the barrier for me. The patriarchy is the barrier. We have to name the systems that are the barriers. And so when you talk about imposter syndrome with women and people of color, you have to look at the system in which they work. And how is that system making them feel less than and like they don't measure up? And how is it structured? And I'm telling you, it still exists to silence women and to make them not speak up, take care of the men in the room. If you have a group of women and men in the room, watch it sometime and watch the dynamics. See who talks first, who gives way, who says the most, unless you have a very conscious leader who makes sure that that doesn't happen. All of that is still very present. And unless women can own the system that is oppressing them, quote, and making them feel less than, which is the patriarchy, quote, or just the structures in which we live, then we're going to always think it's about us. And it's not. It is not about us. We are not imposters. We are capable, we are able to do whatever a man can do, many times better. And it's a myth. It's a myth that has been purported about us and on us that women need to help other women let go of.
Have you ever felt like an imposter?
Sure. Oh, definitely. Yeah. What I used to say I was the reluctant everything. So when I took over the organization where I was executive director, I was like, why am I in this job? I am not qualified for this job. Oh my gosh. When in truth, I was very qualified. I had the education, I had the experience, I had dealt with people my entire life. Yeah, there were really tough decisions. There was a lot of new stuff to learn. But that didn't mean that I was an imposter and that I was a fake, but I felt like a fake. And that's how we're trained if we step out of our comfort zone.
Very good. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the relationship between the board of directors and the executive director.
Lord. Okay.
I've known more than one executive director who thinks that the board is a bother. Like They can run the organization, they can create the strategic plan. They don't need a board, except as a rubber stamp. And then the other extreme where the ED is under the thumb of the board.
Yeah.
So what makes a good balanced relationship, and whose responsibility is it to see that happens?
Well, theoretically, of course, it's the board chair. However, you have to keep in mind that everyone on a board of directors at nonprofits are volunteers, and they have full lives of their own. And no matter how much they love the organization, they're not going to be able to put it first most of the time. Thinking around board of directors in nonprofits is changing, by the way. You know who BoardSource is. Mm-hmm. Fabulous resource. I highly recommend it to any executive directors of nonprofits. They are doing some incredible work around looking at the board of directors system, whether it's still viable, how to change it, blah, blah, blah. But what we have today is one that's fairly difficult to manage, for sure. And as we tell our women, it doesn't matter what the board is supposed to do. You lead the organization. You make the recommendations to the board. It all comes from you because they're going to be gone in a year or two. Mm-hmm. Your board chair may change every year. They may change every 2 years. You are the constant. You know the most about your organization than anyone else. And so you must be the one to lead the board and to be a partner with the board. Now, what happens then is people start saying, well, but they're my boss and blah, 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 blah. And that is true. However, if you let that cower you, then you're not leading the organization. It's your job to do it. And it's your vision. If, Lord have mercy, never let a board do strategic planning without you having recommendations ready. They will go off into left field and you'll be going, oh my gosh, what the have I done? This is not what I wanted at all. And that's because you were not proactive and you didn't plan and you didn't have the recommendations ready. It's up to you. It's up to the ED.
But isn't it the board's responsibility to develop the strategic plan?
Sure. But they should not do it on their own. And they will not do it on their own 90% of the time. They simply don't have the bandwidth or the time. The ED, that's their full-time job, or the CEO. Mm-hmm. And it must come from there. And the relationship between the CEO and the board chair is critical, because if the CEO can have the board chair's ear and talk about and have regular meetings about the strategic direction of the organization and where we think it should go and how we should do it, then the board chair is going to be fine with whatever the ED comes up with. If you never meet with your board chair, how are you going to make any kind of impact? It must be a regular meeting with the board chair. That is key to your relationship to the board. Even if your board chair doesn't want to, you have to make that happen. Either a phone call, email, Zoom, just a weekly check-in, once a month deep dive, something. You have to make it happen.
Let's say, just to continue on this point for a minute, that for whatever reason, the board chair doesn't like you.
And there's a million reasons.
Yeah, and they don't want to meet with you, and they don't think it's their job, and whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, what does an ED do? Do they just like ride out that year or what?
No, not first. I mean, that's not first choice.
Yeah.
First choice is you find your allies on the board and you talk to someone that you can trust on the board. And you say, look, I'm really struggling with my relationship with the board chair. Do you think there's anything that you could do to help? I really want to meet with him or her. And I think that's part of their duty. It's certainly part of my duty, is to meet regularly and keep them updated and have us brainstorm about the organization. And it could be that they just don't know what they're supposed to do, or they're like, oh, well, she should do it or he should do it, meaning the ED. And that's not true either, because what will happen is then the ED will come up with something and the board chair will shoot it down if they haven't had conversation about it. Nobody likes to be blindsided. And so you have to find your allies if you're having trouble with your board chair. And then, if that doesn't work, then you got to find a coach to help you and to strategize. It's not something that's easy to do on your own. And then third choice is you ride out the year and you try to make, no waves, and you try to keep things as they are and keep the organization moving and do what has to be done, and you ride out that year. I mean, people have done it a lot.
What do you do? And I've been on the receiving end of this next question as a staff person. What do you do when board members start having conversations or try to have relationships? And I don't mean any kind of negative relation, but
right.
But they get in with the staff.
Right. That's a no-no.
What do you do about that?
You need to talk to your ED.
No, the staff person needs to talk to the ED.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what is the ED supposed to do?
The ED goes to the board person and says, I'm not sure that you really understand this. You may not know, but best practice is that really any concern that you have or idea or whatever really needs to come through me first. And then I'll decide who needs to handle it. Because my staff never has all the facts. And so you're going to put them in a really bad position by going directly to them and saying, hey, why don't we do so-and-so and so-and-so? And it may sound like a great idea to them, but they don't know that there's no money for that, or they don't have all the pieces to the puzzle. And so protocol is that you come to me first. Now, that should happen, that should be trained in board orientation. Every board member should learn very early that the only staff person that they interact with, unless the CEO has approved it, is the CEO. For instance, I was with a big organization, and my development person had a huge responsibilities. And so my board interacted with her directly because of all the events that we did and everything. And that was fine with me because she always came back to me. But you have to approve it.
Great. There are now college degrees in nonprofit management, which is sort of a recent event. I don't know, last 10 years or something, I guess, or maybe more. Have you worked with or consulted with a newly minted ED who's come out of one of these programs? And what was that like?
You know, I haven't. However, I have worked with newly minted MBAs, and that's, it's different, but you learn similar processes and, like how to project manage and how to manage employees and blah, 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 blah. And it's like I said at the very beginning, though, it's like when you're trained as a therapist. It goes out the window. Now, it doesn't really go out the window, though, because hopefully you've got that learning in your DNA after having gone through that. But to expect the real world to be like your experience in graduate school you're going to have a rude awakening. And for someone who's trying to work with someone like that, it's touchy because you don't want to put their fire out. You don't want to discourage them from having great ideas, but you do want them to understand what's feasible. They don't know the history of the organization. They don't know everything that has happened before. And you have to do it in a careful and empathetic way because they want to contribute, and they want to contribute what they've learned.
What do you consider to be the top 3 or top 10 or whatever leadership skills that an executive director needs?
Well, first of all, is the one that they have to think macro and micro. They need to be able to hire well. And they need to be able to hire people, to not be scared to hire people who are different from them and who are smarter than they. Because there's no way for you to know everything that's going on in the organization. Oh my gosh. When I took over at my organization, I couldn't even read a budget. I mean, I'm like, I can't do finance. Somebody help me. And so luckily I had someone who was a genius at it. Same thing with development. I was a program person. And many people become EDs out of program. Mm-hmm. And so they have no experience with fundraising or with the finances. And so you have to know how to hire people who are smarter than you and who can help you and who have very different skills than you do. Although I'm going to hedge my bet a little bit on this, but I don't know if you've heard of StrengthsFinder, Gallup. Mm-hmm. You can't really use that as a hiring tool, but it's good to know what your strengths are through StrengthsFinder to know what your top 5 are, for instance, to know, well, okay, I might be weak in this area, so I need someone, you know. So, for instance, my business partner and I are totally opposite on StrengthsFinder. My top one, like you, is intellection. So we love to think. She acts. And so we balance each other. And you need to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. And then hire people around you who are good at what you're not good at. So that's key. The other thing is, I think you really have to learn to be patient. Change in nonprofit takes a long time. And my board, when I first took over, was very impatient. And, you know, the organization needed a lot of help. We needed to get back on track really quickly. We needed to raise a lot of money, blah, 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 blah. And they were very impatient. And my development director and I finally sat down with them and said, look, this is where we are. This is where y'all want us to be. It's going to take 10 years. Now, if you think it can be done faster than that, great. Go find someone who can do it. But from our calculations and from what we think we can do without killing everybody, it'll be 10 years. And it was. And in 10 years, we were in fabulous shape. So you have to be patient. It is truly a marathon.
And empathetic is one of the leadership skills.
Yes, empathetic. However, you can be empathetic and still fire people. You can be empathetic and still make really tough decisions. It's like with your kids when they're, falling down on the grocery store floor turning purple. You can say, I really hear you're upset and we're going to leave anyway. And you drag them out the front door. It's the same thing with having to make really tough decisions. You can do it empathetically. I really hate that we have come to this point. Your work just isn't, it's not where we need it to be. And I'm really sorry, we're going to have to let you go. So you don't have to bludgeon people, and you still have to make really tough decisions, and you have to be willing to put your loyalty must lie with the organization at all cost, which means you have to be willing to fire your brother or your sister or someone who's been there 25 years that everybody loved and is not doing their job and is hurting the organization. You have to put the needs of the organization above yourself, above everybody. That's where your loyalty lies.
Mm. That's a good one. And I don't really think I've heard anybody talk about that.
Really?
Well, not as emphatically as you just did.
Oh, no. Well, let me tell you, it saved me. I learned that from a leader circle I was in when I was having a really tough decision to make about an employee. And they were relentless. It was like, okay, we know you love this person, blah, 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 and you are responsible to the organization. The end.
All right. Can effective leadership be learned, or are there just naturally born leaders?
No, I think it can be learned. I think that you have to want to learn. You cannot go in as a leader thinking you know everything. If you do that, you're not leading and no one's going to like you. To me, a leader has to be willing to constantly be learning and improving their skill set, keeping up with what's going on in the zeitgeist around them, what's happening in their field. For instance, there are some tremendously volatile and touchy HR issues evolving now, not only in nonprofit, but in for-profit, around gender identity, the fluidity of gender, how do we talk about it, around mental health issues, stuff like that. EDs need to be up on what's going on and what the trends are and what's happening and what is going to happen. And in order to keep up with that and to be a constant learner and then to apply it to your organization, you have to have a North Star of what your organization's mission is, what its values are, and how then would these trending issues play out based on what our mission is and what our values are. So, you want an example?
Mm-hmm. Please.
Okay. So, say, for instance, I ran a shelter for runaway teens, okay? So, that's the mission. Your primary mission is to provide housing for unhoused teens or runaways. Well, there's a lot of different ways to do that mission. You can have a shelter. You can have host homes. You can put them up in hotels. You can have apartments. I mean, there's lots of different ways to fulfill your mission. How you're going to fulfill your mission depends on the values that you hold. So, for instance, if you are a conservative religious organization, there may be things that a person has to meet in terms of religious views or accept certain religious dogma before they can come in, okay? So that's a value. On the other hand, if you're not that kind of organization, if you're welcome, whoever you are, come on in, then the decisions that you make are going to be based on that value. So your North Star then becomes what influences you in terms of how you learn things and then how to apply those to the mission and the work that you do. And if you don't have that, for instance, with all this gender stuff, okay, so you're the ED and you think, oh, well, we need to start using pronouns. And you haven't talked about that with anyone. You haven't talked about it with your leadership team. You haven't looked at what our values are. Is this something we value, not value, blah, 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 blah. And you just say, okay, we're going to start using pronouns. Everybody has to put pronouns by their name. Chaos will ensue. Let me assure you. So that's what I mean by you have to be learning and you have to look and you have to learn through the lens of your values. That's what I was trying to say. Mm. The values of the organization.
And who's responsible for establishing those values?
That's a great question. I think, quite frankly, some people will say it should come from the board. I tend to disagree with that. I think it needs to start with, again, the CEO and the leadership team, who then makes those recommendations to the board. Mm. Because you don't want a board to derail you if you have a tough decision to make and they've all of a sudden decided, one person has decided, I don't like that value, and so blah, blah, blah. And so, again, you're the constant. Mm. You're the constant. And so any kind of change or values statement, I think, starts with you.
Why are there more women in nonprofit executive positions, except for the very elite positions like in universities and hospitals?
Right.
Why are there more women?
Well, because like nurses, it was considered a female-centric, nonprofit work was considered much more female-centric than male-centric, and it was always lower paying, still is, than, quote, male-dominated fields. And so more women ended up in nonprofit in the first place. And so that's why you have more female leaders. I'm not sure about for-profit. I don't know how that all plays out. Well, I do know how. I mean, there are not nearly as many women in leadership positions in the for-profit world, but it's a much higher monetized world than is nonprofit, except for the biggies, like you're saying. Mm-hmm. And so, what is the word I'm looking for? It's the feminization of a profession. Mm. That's what happened, and that's what happened to nonprofit. And because of that, because there's not equality of value in what feminine work is, then there's lower pay. Therefore, women got hired more often than men because men wouldn't take the pay. It's a circle.
When is it time for a leader, male or female, of a nonprofit to hand over the reins?
Sooner rather than later. Now, I don't mean that literally, because some people have remained at places for a long time and remain vital. And if you can remain vital and learning and changing, that's one thing. Warren Buffett used to say you should never stay anywhere longer than 10 years. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I do agree that you shouldn't be there forever. And if you're a founder and you decide it's time to turn over the reins, you need to turn over the reins and leave. I can't tell you the issues that we have dealt with young women taking over organizations after longtime EDs or founders, and the struggle they have trying to make a name for themselves, have their own imprint on the organization, particularly if the founder hangs around. And so I would say, with love to every founder, when you leave, leave. Let the next generation do it. You've had your day. You've done wonderful things. Go do something else wonderful. I was at my organization 16 years. It was too long. I should have left at 10 years. Looking back, of course, which is always 2020. People don't leave for a variety of reasons. They can't leave financially, or they don't think the place can live without them. They don't know what else they would do, things like that. I just think it's really hurtful to an organization for someone to stay around forever, and then the people who take over are always left with a mess. Whereas if you're an ED, your goal should be to have your organization in a place by the time you leave that it can run seamlessly without you. And I was so fortunate to have an incredible leadership team that I could go to Washington, D.C. and review federal grants for 3 weeks at a time. And the organization would run like a dream. And that's what EDs need to do, is to hire the right people, let them be responsible, let them do their jobs, and let the organization run without them.
What do you see more often than not when these executive transitions or retirements take place, that organizations falter or that they are able to run with new leadership?
You know, it really depends. There's a lot of variables. It depends on several things. One being what the ED before the new one, how much ownership they had of the organization. I never wanted ownership of my organization. I wanted to represent it. I wanted to serve it. I wanted to do the best I possibly could for my employees and the kids we served. I did not want to own that thing. And when I left, I was like, I am out of here. And that's how an ED should think, I think. When you own and become too invested, then you're going to make mistakes. You're going to be biased. You're going to do things that you shouldn't do. You're going to hang on too long if you have too much ownership. That's why founders sometimes get in trouble when they hang on too long and things are changing, things are moving, they can't keep up, but they won't admit it. Technology is an incredible example of that. And so then the organization suffers. If the ED or the founder has gotten the organization to a great place and they're out on, a high streak, then that gives the incoming person a lot of momentum to keep going. And that's what everybody's goal should be, is to leave the organization better than when you found it, not worse. Unfortunately, that happens a lot.
What do you see the future to be for U.S. nonprofit organizations?
Well, I think they will continue. The private sector is not going to do the work that nonprofits do. I don't care what anybody says. I think that there are way too many nonprofits, and that smaller nonprofits seriously need to look at who could we partner with and get the egos out of it. Who can we partner with? Why are we fighting for the same money? Let's go together. Let's make it better. So I think that, like life, the fittest are going to survive. And the ones who aren't willing to be innovative and team with other people and change how they do things and change how they think, that they will be gone. And if they're too small and not willing to really look at themselves and say, you know what, we're really a program that should be in a larger organization. Let's see who we could work with, who matches us, that would give us the strength to carry this program on, but not have to worry about all this funding and all this other stuff. When egos get in the way, nonprofits will close. That's all there is to it.
Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give young Harriet?
Don't do it. No, not really. Oh, my goodness. Let's see. I would tell her that she's a damn good leader. And that for someone who came in with absolutely no experience in finance and development. I mean, I'd been in the business world for 10 or 15 years before I went back to school to become a therapist. And then I was a therapist. I hadn't led a nonprofit. I was always on the clinical side. And so I would have patted myself on the back a lot more. We really did some great things. And I don't think we took enough time to celebrate those. I tried, but the pace is so fast that unless you're willing to just bring the train to a screeching halt and say, we're going to take these 2 days to celebrate, it doesn't happen. You're on to the next fire. You're on to the next thing. And so what I would tell myself is, you know what, you're very capable, you can do this, and you need to stop running. Stop things. Celebrate. Think. Take time to think. Make your staff think. Use your North Star. Don't be led by the nose. When an organization starts chasing money, you mission drift. You have all kinds of problems. You morph into something that you're not meant to be. And then you end up closing. I've seen it time and time again. When we had a struggle at my organization, somewhat with that, and what I decided was that I had to decide that I want this organization to get bigger breadth-wise, or did I want this organization to get bigger depth-wise? And I really narrowed the focus to teens. We were serving families, and we were doing a lot of work in the community. But when I challenged my employees to think, okay, but why are we working with the family? Why are we working with the community? Who is it that we're working for? And it's the teens. And so when we really narrowed our focus and deepened those services to really focus on long-term housing, life skills, what are these kids going to need when they grow up? How can we help them long-term, not just short-term? I felt much better about what we did, and our results were better.
Harriet, because I know you have a lot of different interests. You don't spend 24/7 thinking about leadership.
No.
Even though it might sound like it at the moment. I want your opinion. I'm just having trouble putting this question together. Okay. But I think it's important for people to have more than one interest, to be able to speak to more than one subject and be comfortable in more than one setting.
Right.
And yet I don't see that. Or maybe I just don't know these people very well. I'm not sure which.
Well, it's like, how do you have a life outside of ED? Whenever I hear someone say, my life is my agency or whatever, I'm like, oh, Lord, help. Go play pickleball or something. It's like, no. If it is your life, it will kill you, and you will have no life. You will never want to let it go, and then you will ruin the organization. You must have other interests. I sang with choirs for years. I've always done yoga. I am fairly social, not as much as I used to be. As I've gotten older, I'm becoming much more an introvert. But I am interested in many, many things. I read a lot. I write. My organization was part of my life, but it was not my life. And I think that's crucial. I think people who make it their life and that's the only thing they have are in deep trouble and need help.
Thank you, Dr. Harriet Boorhem.
You're welcome, Diana Marquis.
For being our guest on About Fundraising, the podcast.
Hold on, I have to say something about you that people don't know. So Diana has been in the nonprofit world for a long time, but for those of you who don't know, Diana is also an incredible artist. And when she said that I'm her patron, what she means is that I bought a lot of her art pieces. So if you love, what is it that you, sculpture? No, you don't do sculpture, you do...
I do sculptural ceramics.
Yeah, thank you. Sculptural ceramics. You need to talk to Diana. She does fabulous work.
Thank you, Harriet.
You're welcome.
Or should I say Dr. Harriet Boorhem?
No.
Thank you so much.